So the conclusion of the article that you were very kind to quote was, people do not protect what they do not value, and they do not value what they no longer see as relevant to their lives. So it's about like, what would make wine relevant to people's life at the moment. And there are some things, I guess, when farming is a big one, and there's many different reasons that, I mean, and farming is the obvious one. I mean, to me, if you're not sustainable in the way you farm, or regenerative or organic at the minimum, again, you're here to create good, right? And good starts with the soil, and it's so magical.
Hey, welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Adam Huss, and I want to say a very special thank you to everyone who subscribes and supports Beyond Organic Wine. There's been a surge of support since I called for a boycott of wines grown with herbicide, and that was honestly the last thing I expected, and it means a lot to me. I didn't know what I was getting into when I invited everyone to join this boycott. I just knew I was fed up with the excuses for the use of herbicides in wine in the context of the political corruption by which the majority of these herbicides like glyphosate and atrazine, etc., have become the most used pesticides on Earth, rather than a footnote of greed that was banned as soon as sane people understood their true impact. So, it means a lot. Please join the boycott of all wines made with herbicides and spread the word. And here's a Latin proverb to chew on in relation to this. Venenum in Auro Bibitur, which means poison is drunk in gold, or more prosaically, poison is drunk from a golden vessel. And whether you're a new subscriber or have been a longtime supporter, I want you to know that Beyond Organic Wine couldn't exist without you, so thank you. If you'd like to support Beyond Organic Wine, or if you'd simply like to listen to the entirety of this amazing, helpful, and insightful interview, please subscribe at beyondorganicwine.substack.com. The second half of this episode, and actually the most practically applicable and helpful part of this interview, is available for subscribers only. But the first half is a doozy too, because my guest is the brilliant Pauline Vicard, who is the co-founder and executive director of Auro Global, an international think tank dedicated to exploring the future of fine wine. It may be the only fine wine or even wine think tank on Earth. And I asked her to share her findings and thoughts about the definition of quote-unquote fine wine, the problems implicit in this definition, and in the act of defining a category of wine as quote-unquote fine. And then Pauline digs into the relevance of fine wine to culture in the 21st century. That really is the background for this whole interview. Some fascinating insights happen along the way into how we think about elitism and excellence in relation to wine, and some really helpful practical solutions at the end for engaging wine as a vital part of our cultures again. I hope you'll find it as valuable as I did to examine the definition of fine wine that Pauline gives. Who does it advantage and who does it disadvantage? Fine wine, by the definition given, requires the recognition of critics. And unfortunately, critics, as Pauline mentions, too often agree that the good is within a very limited spectrum of flavors. So what if your wine is excellent or even greater than excellent, yet falls outside of those narrow limits that critics have? Also baked into this definition of fine wine, as you'll hear, is the idea that fine wine requires expensive real estate. That's an oversimplified version of it, but that is the gist, because you'll hear in the definition of fine wine that there's a recognition of the importance of the region from where it comes. And of course, if you're in a region that isn't known for wine, it will be extremely hard for you to be considered fine. And so somebody who can afford $1 million per acre real estate, that is the going rate in many fine wine regions, already has an advantage over someone who can't. The definition of fine wine, as you'll see, also advantages Europe, because time and consistency over time in the repetitive practice of what we call culture or tradition is something they've been doing longer than anyone, because European wine culture is what was exported to the rest of the world and became what most people call wine now. Are we okay with a definition that does these things? Do we understand how the definition of quote unquote fine influences the wine that we drink and the wine that we make? And is that influence generally positive or negative? Are we aspiring to achieve a definition with our wine that will only ever be aspirational for those of us who don't live in prime real estate and have prime marketing budgets? And does our aspiration actually fuel the entrenched regions and ideas about what wine is and what fine wine is? Also, to what extent does the pressure of being fine when you start selling your wine for over $100, maybe over $1,000, to what extent does that cause you to want to limit your risk? In other words, do you become more conservative the more fine your wine becomes? And does it make sense then to look for fine wine for innovation and the evolution of wine culture? In other words, does it make sense to look to fine wine for the future of wine? To what extent is fine wine an English colonial export that doesn't translate to other cultures? We explored these and many, many more questions, and that's just the first part of the interview. Behind the paywall, we get into some really juicy and interesting topics, and Pauline describes some really great ways that wineries can start thinking differently about how to develop wine into an interactive community and how important that is to keeping the culture of wine alive, perhaps also helping with your sales and long-term business sustainability. I'll include a link to that article that Pauline wrote that is on jancetsrobinson.com titled The Future of Wine Depends on Culture. A big thanks to Pauline for this interview. There are so many great things about it. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Pauline, welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. Thank you for doing this. Can you introduce yourself, what you do, and where you are in the world, and what's going on there? Yes, I watched the game yesterday. Le Bleu. Mm. Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, I have so many questions already, and most of them are about the World Cup. No, I'm just kidding. Um, so is Areni Global the only wine think tank on Earth? Like, I yeah, that's what I thought. You get, yeah. Mhm. I was just about to ask. Yeah, what is fine wine? Like, so, I mean, here's let me put it in a really practical way. So I'm, growing a kind of unique vineyard. Well, it's not even a vineyard, it's a polyculture that involves vines growing on living trees here in New York, and I intend to make wine from this farm. How would I get that wine to be considered fine wine? Mhm. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay, got it. No, that's what I I love. Mhm. Mhm. What wa what was that one? What was that one? The capacity to oh, age, ability. Mhm. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Yeah, yeah, no, this is fantastic. I mean, the reason I take a deep breath is because there's so many things in that, and I'm not even sure where to begin. I, you know, I think maybe it's just stepping back, and one of the reasons that we are talking is because I read this article that you wrote that was in Jancis Robinson. "The Future of Wine Depends on Culture" is the title. And uh, fantastic article. I think everybody should read it. It's not behind a paywall, as far as I understand. Um, and yeah, so really a lovely introduction to some of the ideas that I want to talk to you about and why I reached out to you. Um, and a big, if I just sum the theme up of that article, it's about wine's cultural relevance. And I I just wonder, and this is a big question, and I will dig into it more on a line by line basis. But I wonder if this definition of fine wine is part of why it has a relevance problem. I think, I mean, I just think about, like, if you want to make wine, I mean, I would just question. I guess I have a bunch of questions. Things like winemaker intentionality and doing the best. I mean, the budget of the winery can determine a lot of what you're able to do. Like, I have a $0 budget on my winery right now. And so, like, I'm not going to be able to afford optical sorters and, glycol chilled tanks, things like that, obviously affect quality in one way or another. And we can debate, like, if they're necessary for quality or if they harm quality or help quality. But, um, they are, they might be seen as something, as a version of doing your best that I'm incapable of doing, even if I wanted to do. And, I wonder. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Me either. Yeah. 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 Um, I mean, you just mentioned like several $100 bottles, and I mean, is there a price below which it won't be considered fine wine if a bottle is $25? Yeah. Yeah. Like, mm, hmm. Oh, yeah. Right. Well, that's what I was gonna. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I will just go back to the Grand and the Haute, and the idea of that being related to, a religious aspiration or, transcendent, we'll say, like a sort of, something aspiring for something grander than yourself. I think at this point in history, though, that just is inescapably classist. Like I don't I mean I agree with you. It is a beautiful aspiration and I aspire to that in a sense. Like I'm not religious, but that idea of connecting with the grander community of life that I'm just a small part of is definitely in everything that I do with wine. And I agree with you. I think we totally see eye to eye on that. But I think in the terminology and the understanding, like especially when you have the petit pot, the the little people wine, I you know I've okay, but I mean yeah, go ahead. Right, yeah. No, that I get it, yeah. Well, there you use the word that I was gonna bring up, which is elite, and elitism, I think, has been well, I'll just put it this way. In the US, and I'm obviously looking at it from a very different perspective than you are, and I can sort of describe what I see over here in the former colonies of Europe. I think there has been or there was historically, post World War II, until I would say, recently, almost like a class and status aspiration to the way that wine was marketed and sold and made and defined in our cultures here, in the sense that there was like it was a joke. Beer was for normal people and wine was for snobs, and wine was, you'd hold your pinky out as you drank your glass, as opposed to like a mug of beer or a can of beer or whatever it is. These were just comedic, stereotypic ideas, but they undergirded, I think, the foundational idea that this was an elitist aspirational thing. Yeah. Right, right, right. That's funny. But I guess my go ahead. Go ahead. Well, no, I mean, the question I was leading to was sort of in term. It's a big question, so we can stay where we are. But the in relation to wine's cultural relevance, I mean, I think what I'm seeing is that idea, like the people who see wine through this class and status aspiration, the collectors and the you know people who are, I think, interacting with what most people think of as fine wine are just a dying breed. Like, and new generation, I mean, I think elitism is dead. I think not only is it dead, but I think like my generation and younger see it as a bad thing. Like it's not only dead, it's like anathema. It is something we reject and think of as negative, and that is part of what's gone wrong with wine, I believe, is like we're not interested in drinking something that gives us class and status. We're interested in the opposite, the petit peu. Okay, go ahead. But isn't it more okay, right. Mm. Perhaps. Perhaps. Mm. Yes, yes. I know what you're saying. Go ahead. Right. Yeah. I Yeah, I mean, I just wanna push back on a couple ideas that I mean, I think that quote is fantastic and definitely points out some really important things like you're drawing attention to, which I love. Thank you for that. My only concern is I don't think we're talking about excellence when she what she's talking about is actually excellence. Like, thank you for listening. The rest of this special interview is available for paid subscribers only. Beyond Organic Wine is entirely listener supported, and subscribers to the Beyond Organic Wine Substack get access to all content. Thank you to those of you who subscribe and make Beyond Organic Wine possible, and a big thanks to Colden Pro and the rest of the community of life that makes the opening and closing music possible.